think I remember which button to push. It's been a while since I've been able to have a chance to teach. So how's everyone doing?
Welcome back.
Thank you. It is good to be back. I think we have a couple more late entries.
Oh, they're home. They came back. Yeah,
Good to see you all.
Hello.
Thank you.
So
You came back in the summer?
they came back in the summer. You know, it's
You know, that's what people said to us back home. You know, they went to Florida in July. I'm here to tell you that it is cooler here than it was in Boston and New York.
That's right.
It has 100 degrees up there. They don't have air conditioning like you guys have down here. They have those stupid little things in the window. And we are so glad to be here. Okay.
in Florida. We're built for the heat,
We're
and
built for it,
yeah,
that's right.
other parts not so much.
Not when it comes to snow. We got snow
I
clouds.
remember when
Yeah,
we
well,
was first.
They don't look very young. Okay.
All right, so
We're in Texas.
It was 1956.
it is good to see everyone, and again, it's good to see everyone in good spirits. But actually, this time of year, good spirits are not the ideal spiritual place to be in, because as of a couple days ago, we have now moved into the month of Av, which means that come Monday night and next Tuesday, we will be commemorating the day of Tisha B'Av, and it's one of those holidays that's the name is actually just the calendar date. Tisha just means 9. It's the 9th day of the month of Av. And what most famously, there are many catastrophes throughout our history that have happened on Tisha B'Av, but what most famously occurred on Tisha B'Av? The destruction of the temples, of both temples, of the first temple and the second temple. And our tradition has gone through many different stages of trying to understand why the temples were destroyed, and symbolically why our nation was put through such catastrophes at these two times in our history. And for the destruction of the first temple, we have the convenient exhortations of the prophets that laid out quite clearly for hundreds of years of why God was preparing to undertake this rather drastic step. And there were three main crimes that our nation was committing that led up to the destruction of the first temple, which were idolatry.
Is this the one with baseless hatred?
That's number 2. Idolatry. Nothing else? Murder. Often literally translated just as bloodshed, the shedding of blood. And the thing we don't put in PG movies.
Yes, sexual
Yeah, let's
behavior.
Licentiousness.
what is often referred to as licentiousness, which I don't know how to spell, or
Oh, come on, you can.
or sexual immorality, adultery and other sundry activities, which we're not going to go into detail at the moment. So the first temple is generally said to have been destroyed because of these 3 crimes. That doesn't mean that there weren't other things going on. We know that people commit transgressions daily in their own life, but these 3 were so endemic to the society that it could no longer stand. And we can imagine if people were worshiping every tree, rock, statue, and bit of dust that they found, that would undermine their connection to Torah, which would equally then pull down their ability to resist the temptation to murder people who they felt deserved it, either because they were angry with them or because they had something they'd like to take from them. And the desire to do things with people that you shouldn't be doing with those people. Again, you no longer have any checks against such activities. And once these become as rampant as they became, the society could not stand. So the first temple is generally attributed to these, and if you read through the prophets, these 3 get described in great detail and are referred to consistently throughout the prophetic works. That's temple number 1, the temple built by Solomon. Temple number 2, which was built after we returned from the Babylonian exile, which we had gone into because of the destruction of number 1, was destroyed by, not the Babylonians, but the Romans, exactly, in 70 CE. That's 70 of the Common Era, so just under 2,000 years ago. There was only one cause generally given as a blanket statement for why the Second Temple was destroyed. Harriet already alluded to it.
Baseless hatred.
Baseless hatred. Baseless, I know I can spell that. Hatred. Sinat hinam. Baseless hatred. Of what?
Each other.
Each other.
Of each other. Of each other. That the Second Temple was destroyed and presumably has not been rebuilt because we have not dealt with this transgression completely yet. These three, yes, they still continue in some measure in individuals in our society. There are still Jewish murderers, there are still unfortunately plenty of Jews engaged in sexual immorality, and there are still Jewish idolaters, absolutely. But as a society of Jews, we have no longer found that these three are acceptable behavior within our communities. If somebody engages in idolatry, we don't say, oh yeah, well that's normal. We say, what do you mean you're worshiping Zeus? Well, what kind of person are you? I can't, you're worshiping Baal, I can't just hang out with you anymore. This is no longer socially acceptable. And if someone murdered someone, we would expect and hope that justice would take its rightful course and that they would receive whatever punishment was necessary for the crime. And sexual immorality, we may turn a blind eye to many of the provocative aspects of modern society, but I don't think that there's anybody in the Jewish community that condones acts such as adultery or incest or other such forms of sexual immorality. We may acknowledge that they occur, but we certainly don't celebrate them, condone them, or say, well, that's no problem. We say it is a problem. Baseless hatred? Are we done with that one yet? Not so much. And we're actually going to look, as this is coming up to be Shabbat Chazon, which is the Shabbat immediately preceding Tisha B'Av. We're actually going to look at the Talmudic account of how this baseless hatred comes to lead to the destruction of the temple. So the section we're going to be reading from, I see. We've got a front and back situation here. I thought that these were printed front and back. They were not. So you're going to need two sheets, and they should not look the same. One is the front, one is the back. They should be stacked with front, back, front, back, front, back as you go through. So it shouldn't be too complicated. Those of you who are playing at home can get the PDF, of course, and then you won't have to worry about the misprint. So the first one should say Shabbat Chazon, and the second one should begin with the word Marta. How are we doing? Now we're not going to need our Chumashim for this one. Hopefully you will study Parashat Devarim on your own. And we're going to start off with a story that might be familiar, but unfortunately when this story is often taught, the end of the story, of where it leads, is not included in those discussions. And so we're going to go through the story, which you might be familiar with, and then we're going to see what the outcome of that story truly is. And we're going to go through a little bit more detail than you might have encountered in these tales. How are we doing? Do we have enough copies?
Yeah.
Yes?
We're still working on separating them.
Okay. Well, we're reading it all out loud, so if you don't have a copy in your hand yet, just listen along. So who'd like to start us off with a lovely tale of two fellows? All right, thank you.
There was a man whose friend was Kamsa, and whose enemy was Bar Kamsa.
All right, so let's make sure. We all know, how many Davids do we know? Right, a few. How many Joshuas do we know? Right, how many Rachels do we know? People share names, or at least have very similar names. And in this particular case, we've got a guy. We're going to call him the host, as we're going to see. And the host has a friend named Kamsa and an enemy named Bar Kamsa. Got it? But bar literally does mean son, but there's no indication that this is father and son. By context, it seems to be that these are two separate guys, one who happens to be named Kamsa, one who happens to be named Bar Kamsa. Yep, I think we're all set for the handouts. One's a friend, one's an enemy. Keep going.
He made a party and said to his slave, "Go invite Kamsa." He went and brought Bar Kamsa.
Whoops. So he tells his servant, it's hard to find good slaves these days, go bring Kamsa. And the servant, not doing what his master actually wanted, runs off and brings Bar Kamsa, brings the enemy.
The host came and found him seated. He said to him, "Since you're the one who tells stories about me, what in the world are you doing here? Get up, get out."
What are you hate me, I hate you. You're spreading all sorts of stuff about me. Why are you sitting here at my table? Get out. Right? Someone shows up to the wedding reception for your children, and they're your worst business rival who's been cheating and stealing and ruining your business, and then they walk in uninvited. You tell them to leave, right?
He said to him, "Since I've come, let me stay, and I'll pay you for whatever I eat and drink."
All right, so Bar Kamsa says to the host, look, I'm already here. Don't humiliate me. I'll pay for my meal. Just consider me like a customer at a restaurant.
He said to him, "No." He said to him, "Then I'll pay you half the cost of your whole banquet."
I'll cover half the reception, half this affair.
He said to him, "No." He said to him, "I'll give you the whole cost of your banquet." And he said to him, "No." He grabbed him by the hand and took him and threw him out.
All right. Hospitality at its finest, right?
Yeah.
So this is one example, and we're going to see a couple different versions of this problem, but this is one example of what hatred can do in a situation. When you have two people that apparently have good reason, or at least prior grounds for hating each other, come to this sort of inability to at least find a moment's peace in order to avoid the embarrassment of one and the ruining of the banquet of the other. I mean, after all, we could have had Bar Kamsa, the guy who shouldn't have been there. He probably shouldn't have come. And secondly, when he did come and his host asked him to leave, he probably should have left politely and quietly. But instead, he forced his host to have to throw him out. On the other hand, the host, having seen this man there, and having found out, if he had asked, how he got there, should have allowed him some way to compromise and avoid a public scene, avoid embarrassing this guy, even if he didn't like him. Neither one was willing to find that common ground. And this is what happens.
The man thought,
This is Bar Kamsa, the guy who was just thrown out and humiliated.
"Since the rabbis were sitting right there and they didn't object, it follows that they're perfectly happy with such a thing. I'll go and report them to the government."
All right. There were rabbis at the feast. There were rabbis at the banquet. Sages. And while all this altercation was going on, what did the rabbis do?
Nothing.
Nothing. And doing nothing is the same as accepting and saying you approve of something. If you were to see somebody beating a child, God forbid, in the supermarket, I mean, not just, come along, but real laying into the kid, and you did nothing, you would be saying
That's okay.
that it's okay. You might be thinking it's none of my business, which is a politer way we tell ourselves it's okay. Because certainly if we saw someone actually murdering someone, we would think it was our business. We would at least call the police, even if we couldn't physically intervene. The rabbis did nothing, and therefore Bar Kamsa is angry not just at his host, who he already didn't like, but is now angry at the entire rabbinic community. Because after all, if the rabbinic community is willing to let something like this go on, what good are they to the nation? What good are they to the people?
He went and told Caesar, "The Jews are rebelling against you." He said to him, "How shall I know?" He said to him, "Send them an offering. See if they offer it up."
All right, so he goes and reports probably not necessarily to actually Caesar, but to the local government magistrate, and tells them the Jews are rebelling. Well, this was a common thing. the Jews were often revolting, as they say.
Yes.
Ba-dum-bum. And the Romans were constantly on the watch for new Jewish uprisings and new Jewish confrontations. So for Bar Kamsa to go and to snitch untruthfully about the rising Jewish rebellion is a perfectly natural thing. And the Roman goes, okay, well, prove it. How are we gonna tell that they're actually uprising, that there's something coming to a head here? He says, send them a sacrifice, and I'll make you a bet they won't offer it. And a refusal to offer the sacrifice of Rome is an act of rebellion.
And let me understand, what Bar Kamsa is doing, even if he were truthful about what happened, was also a bad thing for him to do.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. What he is doing is absolutely
Whether he's right or wrong.
Even if he was the perfectly innocent victim of everything, and hadn't been spreading rumors about the original host, or hadn't made a big fracas about not being thrown out, even if he was perfectly innocent, this would not be a justifiable action of how to take revenge on the people who stood by. He would have an absolute claim to go to the Jewish community and out the rabbis for being useless at this situation, but he does not have the right to go to the Roman oppressors, who are known for being a little bloodthirsty and for having spilt an awful lot of Jewish blood and looking for more opportunities to do the same. He would not have the right to go to them to seek redress against the rabbinic community.
And he went and sent with him a third grown calf. On the way he made a blemish on its upper lip, some say in the white of the eye, in a place that we regard as blemish, but they don't.
All right, so we got this here. We've got Bar Kamsa going with the Roman envoy with the cow. And it's a perfectly good cow. Because the Romans know, they have their own sacrificial law when they worship Zeus and Jupiter and all of that. They know that the gods don't want blemished animals. So they send along a perfectly good cow, but along the route, Bar Kamsa sneaks with the cow, and he blemishes it in a way that would be a blemish for us, for our sacrificial law, but doesn't count as a blemish for Roman law. So as far as the Romans are concerned, it's a perfectly fine cow. But as far as Jews are concerned, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. Let's make sure we understand. Jews the temple did routinely offer sacrifices on behalf of non-Jews. That was normal. So it would be seen very much as an act of rebellion to refuse to offer this cow being sent by the Roman government. Because you accept all the other non-Jewish cows, you're not accepting ours, it's tantamount to rebellion. Keep going.
Rabbis considered offering it up to keep peace of the government.
All right, so that's first option. The rabbis, you're now imagining, are here on the Temple Mount, and the cow comes in. And they know what's brewing. They know that this is a special cow sent by the Romans, and they can see the blemish, and they know the Romans are not going to understand when we try to explain that our sacrificial law is different than their sacrificial law. And so the first option is sacrificing. Just go ahead and sacrifice. Yeah, it's got a blemish, and yes, we shouldn't be sacrificing blemished animals. That's a violation of the mitzvah that God gave us in the book of Vayikra and Leviticus. But for the sake of peace with Rome, we'll do it this one time. Make sense? Yes? No? I mean, we know that from multiple other contexts that if it is necessary to violate a transgression, violate a mitzvah and commit a transgression in order to save a life, or in this case, the life of a nation, that we do so. And that was the rabbi's first instinct. However,
Said to them Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulos, people will say they're offering blemished animals on the altar.
all right, so Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulos says, no, you can't do that. Because if you do that, you'll set a precedent. And everybody will say, oh, so you can offer blemished animals on the altar now. And we won't just violate it this one time. We will end up with people violating this mitzvah of not using blemished animals again and again and again and again. You can't do that. Sets a dangerous precedent.
Slippery slope.
Slippery slope, exactly. People will say.
They considered killing him so that he wouldn't go and report what had happened.
Who's the him?
Bar.
Bar Kamsa.
Yeah.
So Bar Kamsa is the dangerous Jewish informer, right? So if something were to happen to him, he wouldn't be able to go tell Rome that they didn't sacrifice the animal. Remember, non-Jews were not allowed into the inner precincts of the temple. So it's Bar Kamsa that's going to go back and report what did or didn't happen with the cow that the Romans sent.
Is Bar Kamsa Jewish?
Bar Kamsa is Jewish. Absolutely. And he's the one who's going to give the eyewitness testimony back to the Roman envoy of what happened to their cow. So, there could be a problem. And maybe Bar Kamsa would trip and fall on a knife in his back. and then, problem solved.
So why was he so against his own people?
Because he was full of hate. And unfortunately, people who are consumed by hate often do things that rational people wouldn't do. And the even worse part is people who are consumed by hate don't notice that they are behaving irrationally.
Did they give a reason for this hate?
Well, he was humiliated at the banquet, and the sages did nothing.
Oh. Wow.
People have killed for less. All right, so second solution. Kill the guy that's causing the problems.
And commit murder?
And commit murder. In fact, we understand that we can kill people that are trying to do problems. If someone says to you, I've got a gun and I'm going to shoot him, you're allowed to kill me to stop me from killing him. That's certainly fine. That's the laws of Rodef are very clear. And this guy is definitely a Rodef. He's a pursuer, an attacker for the entire nation. So killing him would certainly be justified as a way of protecting the nation. However,
Rabbi said to them, Rabbi Zechariah, they will say, one who makes a blemish on holy things is to be put to death.
no, you can't kill the guy. Because if you kill the guy, then everybody's going to think that from now on it's death penalty for blemishing a consecrated animal. So you can't do that because then people learn the wrong law from that. And they would think that we weren't just killing him to hush things up, because after all, if you're killing him to hush things up, you can't talk about it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been hushed. That means that everyone's going to think the reason we killed him is because he blemished the animal.
How do they know he blemished it?
How do they know what happened? They don't go into details for that, but they seem to be aware of this. And Rabbi Zechariah is afraid that this is the precedent that's going to be set. A lot of hand-wringing over this. People will say. And
Said Rabbi Yohanan, the excess of scruples of Rabbi Zechariah ben Abkulos is what destroyed our house, burned our temple, exiled us from our land.
all right, what do we make of that sentence?
It's casting blame. The one who was so rigid in his interpretation, they're saying, yeah, it's just sacrifice the animal and be done with it.
Yeah, he's saying they had two, well, maybe not good, but two perfectly usable solutions to this crisis. But because they listened to Rabbi Zechariah, and because he was so, the actual word here is used as like excess humility. He was so afraid of doing something that might be misconstrued badly, we ended up being paralyzed and being unable to take one of the two options that could have gotten us out of this particular confrontation. Yes? No? We paint ourselves into the corner sometimes? Okay, so next. Anyone else want to read, or Marion, you happy to keep going? All right, keep going. You're doing a great job. And we got a lot of work to go, so I don't want to waste time looking for more readers.
The emperor sent against them Caesar Nero. As he was coming, he shot an arrow to the east, and it went and fell on Jerusalem. He shot it to the west, and it came and fell on Jerusalem. And so, in the four directions of the heavens, the arrow came and all fell on
It should be fell, sorry.
Jerusalem. He said to a child, "Tell me, what verse are you learning just now?"
This is a form of a considered minor prophecy in Jewish teachings, that if you ask a child what they're studying, that what they tell you can be seen as a minor sign from heaven of some truth.
He said to him, "And I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hands of my people Israel." He said,
Now, Edom, by the way, is a stand-in for the word Rome.
He said, "It is the Holy One, blessed be he, who wants to destroy his house and then go and lay the blame on me."
All right, so he's going, wait a minute. This is not just regular war that's happening here, which Rome was quite familiar with. You know, they conquered and killed all the time. This is God at work. Because if all the signs are saying God wants Jerusalem destroyed, not Rome wants Jerusalem destroyed, but it's God who wants Jerusalem destroyed, and he's just picked us to be his instrument. And having done so, he will then turn around and blame us for doing it. And I don't want any part of that. That sounds like a bad deal to me. Okay, fine, I get to destroy Jerusalem, but then I'm going to be punished later for having done so. And indeed, there's this notion, also when we talked about Pharaoh and the punishment that was laid against Egypt, was God may have already had a certain plan in mind. You did not have to be a willing accomplice with it. And your willingness to go along with this plan means that you are now punishable for having done so. And so this particular Roman general says, I don't want it. I do not want the responsibility of doing this. And so
he ran away and fled and converted to Judaism, and from him came forth
Rabbi Meir, which is a later generation rabbi, one of the brilliant thinkers of our people. Indeed, his interpretation of the Mishnah, his interpretation of the oral law becomes the standard interpretation that is now codified in the Mishnah that we have. So amazing that this guy could see the hand of God written all over this and said, I don't want to touch this. And in fact, you know what? If the God of the Jews is this powerful, I think I might want to join them. Despite what's about to come, I think I might want to join them.
He sent against them Caesar Vespasian. He came and besieged Jerusalem for 3 years.
All right, so the siege of Jerusalem begins. How are we doing? Questions? Comments?
I understand that Caesar Nero converted to Judaism.
Not the Caesar Nero that you're probably familiar with. The Talmud sometimes uses names and titles in ways that are not exactly a one-to-one correlation with the way they would have been used within the Roman annals of history. So this isn't the famous Caesar Nero.
I think this might actually show even that Caesar, who was not a Jew, understood better when you have to be scrupulous, and we're not better than Rabbi Zechariah, who was overly scrupulous and would allow bad things to happen, knowing they would, by being so rigid. Here's Caesar, who seems to understand better and says, whoops.
You know what? I think there's another option of this.
Yeah.
And that option is, I'm going over this way. I'm not going to march on Jerusalem.
I'm out of here.
Yeah, I'm out of here. And sometimes that is the best solution. Yeah. All right, now we get to the siege. And the rabbis want to make sure that we understand just how bad the siege was and just how unnecessary the ultimate fall was. Even at this stage, Jerusalem could have been saved. All right, where the story's not done yet of our own self-destructiveness.
There were in the city 3 nobles, Zaktamon ben Gurion, ben Kalba Savua, and ben Sisi
Hakeset.
One of them said to them, I shall provide food for them in wheat and barley. The next, I will provide wine, oil, and salt. And the third, I'll provide wood. So these men had enough food for the city for 21 years.
All right, so the 3 nobles alone were willing to open up their storehouses to the people of Jerusalem and feed them for as long as the siege lasted. Because back in the day, there were 2 ways technically 3 ways for a siege to end. 1, the conquering army could just leave. 2, the conquering army could breach the walls, which is really hard and takes a lot of people dying on the walls to do so. Or 3, you starve them out. And the sages wanted to make sure we understood we were not in danger of starving. That we could have lasted behind the walls of Jerusalem for 20 years until Rome thought better of conquering and destroying the city.
There were zealots there, said to the rabbis, let's go out and make peace with them.
So the rabbis say to the zealots who are in the leaders of this group, who are now in charge of Jerusalem, let's go and make peace with Rome. All right, we're safe behind the walls for a while. We've got plenty of food. The walls are high and strong. Let's send some emissaries. We'll talk to Rome. We'll calm things down. And it's all just, this silly mistake about the cow in the first place. Let's just get past this and we can have peace. But the zealots,
They wouldn't let them. They said to them, let's go out and make war with them.
The zealots instead want the people to attack Rome. Not just to sit quietly behind the walls defending, but they actually want an offensive campaign to go against Rome. That's how zealous they are.
Rabbi said, nothing good will come of it. They went and burned the stores of wheat and barley, so there was a famine.
Who burnt the wheat?
Zealots.
The zealots. The zealots knew that the people would sit quietly behind the walls and eat from the rations and defend the walls if the Romans attacked, as long as there was food. But if they were starving, then the people would have to act. They would have to break the Roman siege in order to eat. And that was what the Bironim, the zealots, wanted. Was they wanted the people to attack Rome. Because they were itching for a fight with Rome. And they were willing to starve their own people to accomplish that goal.
Marta bar Bagos, who was one of the richest women in Jerusalem, she sent for her messenger and said to him, go, bring me some fine flour. But by the time he went, it sold out. He came and said to her, there's no fine flour, but there's white flour. She said to him, go bring that to me. But by the time he went, it sold out. He came and said to her, there's no white flour, but there's dark flour. She said to him, go bring that to me. By the time he went, it sold out. He came and said to her, there's no dark flour, but there's barley flour. She said to him, go bring that to me. But by the time he went, it sold out.
All right. Got the story? So what's the progression here?
It's really a famine.
It's really a famine, but what are the different steps?
Going from
White
rice
flour.
to.
Exactly. She asks about the finest flour there is to bake with, and then she lowers her sights step by step. And when she gets step by step, she ends up with nada. Even though she was rich, perhaps the text is telling us because she was expecting better, rather than settling for at least food, she got nothing. And worse than that if we keep reading.
In the meantime, she had taken off her shoes. She said, I'll go out and see whether I can find something to eat. Some dung stuck to her foot, and she died. Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai recited in her regard the verse, the tender and delicate woman among you, who would not venture to set the sole of her foot upon the open ground. When she was dying, she brought out all the gold and silver and threw it into the marketplace, saying, what in the world do I need this for? That is in line with the verse, they will throw their silver into the streets.
All right. Desperate. And when you get desperate for food, you realize gold and silver does nothing if there's nothing to buy with it. You can't eat the gold, and you can't eat the silver. And even the wealthiest among the Jerusalemites was not able to sustain herself. So it wasn't just a question of the poor starving. Everyone in the city is dying. Everyone in the city is starving. And everybody knows this is not going to end well for us, as the rabbis had already predicted. How are we doing so far? If it's depressing, good. This is supposed to be a time when we are reflecting upon the very worst of our history. And sometimes the worst of our history has come inflicted upon us by the hands of others. And certainly the Romans share a lot of blame for what happens. But sometimes the worst of history also comes from self-inflicted wounds, which is what we are seeing the root cause here. Keep going.
Abba Sikara was the chief of the zealots in Jerusalem.
All right, now Abba Sikara is the chief of the zealots in Jerusalem. He was their leader, their captain. Now you might also know that because this is really most likely a title. Because Sikara, does that sound familiar to any words you might know? Sikari? The Sikari, the zealots that are mentioned in the time of Jesus in the New Testament, as well as in Josephus. The Sikari were one of the factions of zealots that wanted to fight against the Romans. And Abba means father. So Abba Sikara means the leader of the Sikara. He's the leader of this faction of violent zealots that were known for stabbing people who disagreed with them. Jews in particular, but non-Jews were also fine. But anyone who disagreed would get it in the knife, would get the knife in the dark. And by the way, the group of the Sikari are on the resurgence. There is a group now in Jerusalem that call themselves the Sikari, a Jewish group, that similarly assault people that they believe are violating Judaism as they see it.
He was the son of Rabban Yohan ben Zakkai's sister.
All right, so Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai has a sister. This is his son. That means he is his nephew. Okay? So we've got a rabbi who wants peace. We've got the leader of the Sikari his group wants war. And Rabban Yochanan goes to his nephew to have a little conference.
He sent word to him, come to me in secret. He came. He said to him, how long are you going to act in this way and kill everybody through famine? He said to him, what should I do? If I say anything to them, they'll kill me too.
All right, a lot of pronouns there. Let's make sure we can untangle it. So Abba Sikara is saying, I can't stop this now. If I try and tell the other zealots to make peace, the other zealots will kill me. Even though I'm their, in quote, leader, I can't back down or my life is forfeit. So even if I wanted to make peace, which apparently he seems to be at least entertaining the notion that that might be a good idea at this point when everyone's dying of famine and the Romans are waiting to destroy us, I can't personally because I would personally die. And it wouldn't accomplish anything anyway, because then some other zealot would just rise, he would be more zealous than me, and we'd be back to where we started. So what do you suggest we do?
He said to him, find some sort of remedy for me to get out of here. Maybe there will be the possibility of saving something.
So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai tells the leader, figure out a way to get me out of the city, and maybe I can do something. Because right now the city is sealed, not just for Romans coming in, but sealed to keep the Jews from going out. Because after all, you want as many hungry mouths in the city to make sure the famine is as intense as possible to drive the people into a rage that you can then use to attack the Roman army. So you actually didn't want people to leave, if you were a zealot.
He said to him, pretend to be sick and have everybody come and ask about you. You have something bad smelling and put it by you, so people will think you're dead. Then let your disciples carry you, but nobody else, so that no one will feel that you're still light, since people know that a living being is lighter than a corpse.
You've heard of the term dead weight? Right? We know that when you go to pick someone up who's actually deceased, it feels heavier than picking up someone who's not. That isn't actually a physical change in weight, but there is definitely a perception in weight. And he's worried that as the people are carrying the body out of the city, that they'll notice that the body doesn't feel as heavy as a real dead person should. And that would be, the game is up. So they want to fake an illness so that everyone thinks that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is dead, and then let his disciples carry him out of the city. Sound good? Remember, this wasn't cliche 2,000 years ago. I know that's the kind of thing that we put into all sorts of novels now. 2,000 years ago, we didn't have novels. This was a new idea. Although not that new, as we're going to see.
They did so. Rabbi Eliezer came in at one side and Rabbi Joshua at the other. When they got to the gate, they wanted to stab him.
So the zealots who are guarding the gate see these guys carrying out a body, and they want to make sure that he's dead. So they want to stab the body.
He said to them, people will say they shoved their master.
Stab their
people will
master.
say they stabbed their master.
How could you do that? People would say that they're going around stabbing
Who is
rabbis.
the he they're referring to there?
The he is Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai,
Okay,
who's pretending to be dead.
that's,
Yeah.
okay.
And I must have really liked hearing the guard say, well, let's go ahead and stab the body to be sure. Like, no, we don't want to do that. No, that's not necessary. Yeah, you don't want to stab me.
They wanted to shove him over the wall.
So rather than opening the gates, they say, well, we'll just tip him over the wall outside the city.
People will say they shoved their master over the wall. They opened the gate for him and he got out.
Now, notice here, the people will say is echoing an earlier phrase. Remember when Rabbi Zechariah was saying, we can't do that? Why not? People will say. And they're now using that phrase for good effect. It was used for very bad effect at the start of this episode, and now it's being used to find release. So sometimes you can exploit the people will say attitude against zealots and actually get what you want. But generally speaking, it's not a good phrase to think that you can stand on.
When he got there, he said, peace be unto you, O king. Peace be unto you, O
So
king.
he's talking to Vespasian, the besieging general of the Roman army.
He said to him, you are the subject. You are subject to the death penalty on 2 counts. First of all, I'm not a king. Second, if I really am king, then how come you didn't come to me earlier?
All right, so Vespasian is not emperor yet. And yet Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai calls him emperor. And he says, well, you're dead, because you've called me emperor and I'm not, and that's an act of treason in the Roman world. And secondly, even if I were the emperor, then you should have come to pay respects to me before. So either way, you're dead. Out of the frying pan into the fire, as they say.
He said to him, the truth is, you really are king. Because if you weren't king, then Jerusalem wouldn't have been handed over to you. For it has been written, Lebanon shall fall by the mighty one.
Lebanon is a byword often for the temple itself.
And as to what you have said, if I really am king, then how come you didn't come to me up till now? Up to now, the zealots among us wouldn't let me come.
So he explains, no, you are king, you just don't know it yet. And the reason they didn't come earlier, they wouldn't let me come. The zealots of our own people wouldn't let me come to negotiate with you. How are we doing? Yes? Okay.
In the meantime, an agent came to him from Rome. He said to him, arise, for the Caesar is dead, and the citizens of Rome propose to enthrone you at the head. He said to him, now I'm going away, and I'm sending someone else. So ask something from me, which I'll give you. He said to him, give me Yavne and its sages, and the chain of Rabban Gamaliel, and a physician to heal Rabbi Tzadok.
And that was how Judaism was saved. Because, as we know, the temple was destroyed, and the people of Jerusalem were put to the sword, and Roman oppression became even more severe after this time. But the small academy at Yavne that Rabban Yochanan was able to secure, and the line of Rabban Gamliel, who was technically descended from David, and was the line of the Nasi, the leader of the Sanhedrin, was not executed, as the Romans might very well have done, as they would often do to leaders of rebellious people, whether or not they wanted to be part of the rebellion or not. That preserved Judaism long enough that we could be restored, and that we would be able to provide a chain of our teachings, our traditions, and our wisdom that would outlast the Roman Empire by a few thousand years. But let's talk about the hate. Let's talk about the baseless hatred that brought us to ruin. Because we had, first of all, the baseless hatred between two people, right? Between the host and Bar Kamsa. And then we have the hatred between Bar Kamsa and the rabbis who did nothing. And then we have the hatred between the Bironim, the zealots, and Rome, and in many ways against their own people, willing to sacrifice them for the greater good, as it were. we're not done with this yet. And there are those who say that the redemption won't come until we fix this. When we look back archaeologically, we can see that after the destruction of the first temple, idolatry, murder, and immorality dramatically decreased in the land of Israel. If you go back through the archaeological strata, the clearest one that we can see is, of course, idolatry. If you go to the pre-destruction times, there are little idols in every house that's dug up in the land of Israel, whether it was presumed to be Jewish or Canaanite or what. You look in the archaeological remains after the destruction of the first temple, you don't find idols in every house anymore. You still find some scattered here and there, but that age of pervasive idolatry is over. Baseless hatred is alive and well. And we read about it daily. On Rosh Chodesh Av, the first day of this new month of Av, when we are most deeply aware of the tragedy that we still live by living in a world that is not fully redeemed, and by living, even with the state of Israel in our hands, a not fully perfect peace that we've longed for complete messianic redemption. We have people throwing rocks and eggs and screaming curses at women who want to pray at a wall, at the Kotel. The day later, we have a young Haredi, that's ultra-Orthodox man, who was serving in the army, being assaulted and the center of a riot in Mea Shearim, because the people of the community hated him for being in the army and defending the nation of Israel. That how dare he turn his back, as they see it, on their community's ways. And so they attacked him, and they beat him, and the police had to come in order to stop the riot, and the riot continued long into the day. Because he dared to walk down the street where he had been. Because now he was a soldier. And that was worthy of attack. That was worthy of assault. We are not done with baseless hatred. There are too many among us who continue to hate. And even among those who maybe don't use violence, there are those who continue to hate their opponents. There are those who are on the side of the women on the wall, the side of those who want to help the Haredim be self-sufficient and to be parts of the general fabric of Israel, not identical to it, but part of it, who hate the ultra-Orthodox as well, and who call them all sorts of foul things. Not trying to draw moral equivalency between rhetoric and violence, but the hate at the center of it is the same. And that must stop. We have to learn how to disagree with each other without hate. And we have to learn how to disagree with each other in ways that don't bring further distance between ourselves and redemption. What in the world would happen if Mashiach walked through the door and he looked like a different type of Jew than we were? If he was wearing a black hat and we don't, or if he was wearing a kippah sruga, the knit kippah, rather than a black hat, or if he wasn't wearing a kippah at all, God forbid, because, I mean, after all, a kippah is only a custom, it's not even law, according to Judaism. So that's perfectly reasonable that he might, or maybe he's wearing a Sephardi turban. But he's not our kind of Jew. Would we throw rocks at him? Would we drive him out? Possibly. So why should he bother showing up yet? Why come if he knows that more than half of us probably won't accept him, not because of what he teaches, but because of how he looks, of what his appearance stands for? Marion, you were going to say something.
It appears that it's worsening.
Yes.
That the outward signs of baseless hatred in Israel is increasing. I don't know if it truly is or if it's just coming out of the shadows.
It truly is worsening in its overall effect for a couple reasons. One is because the fundamentalism that drives it in one side, and often is then causing the response from the other, is on the rise globally. Fundamentalism is an international phenomenon, and we should not believe that Jewish fundamentalism is somehow different than Islamic fundamentalism and Christian fundamentalism and Hindu fundamentalism, all of which are on the rise and becoming more extreme wherever they have taken root. And as such, we shouldn't be surprised that our own homegrown fundamentalists are becoming more extreme, just like the fundamentalists of other groups. In Israel in particular, however, there is a growing sense of our good friend Zechariah, of not being willing to take alternative options, of not being willing to see flexibility as a potential good, of not being willing to make changes for the sake of peace. So there has been a growing stringency in the interpretation of Jewish law and the demands of the leaders of these communities, the people that are called the Gedolim, the greats, although I use the term reservedly, to not make any compromise, but instead to pile on further restrictions onto their community. Changing the fabric of even the most traditional Jewish society fundamentally from where it was even 50 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. And that's been driven partly by the rising extremism, fundamentalist extremism. It's also been driven by their fear of modernity. It's also been driven because they've been given the political authority to do so. That within Israel itself, because since 2003 you have had an ultra-Orthodox chief rabbinate, they have been able to implement their will on many aspects of Jewish life. Most recently they did a survey of divorcees, people who have been divorced in Israel, and a full 50% of the women felt that they were extorted during the divorce process, that they were not allowed to complete the divorce without having to sacrifice financial security and other forms of security that was due to them, because the husband had the high ground in the eyes of the rabbinic court. When 50% of the people who go through divorce are saying categorically that they have been extorted, and in fact, that was of the general population, 75% of the ultra-Orthodox women who have gone through divorce felt that they had been extorted, even more strongly within those communities. There's something fundamentally wrong with the willingness to look at other options, the willingness to be lenient as a virtue rather than seeing leniency only as a crime. And that is creating an atmosphere at the lower echelons that maybe the Gedolim don't want. Maybe the leaders of these communities don't realize and wouldn't even approve of the extremism of attacking a soldier in the street because he is Haredi and shouldn't be doing so. Maybe they don't even approve of the throwing of rocks and eggs and of hurling of curses at women who just want to pray in a way that halakha says is perfectly permitted. Maybe they don't approve of that violence, but their teachings, their rulings, and their stringencies in every aspect of life creates an atmosphere, creates a greenhouse where that will grow. And just like our good friend Abba Sikara felt trapped by his followers, that he couldn't change or else they would simply replace him, we are reaching the tipping point within the ultra-Orthodox world where even the greats, should they want to compromise, should they want to promote change, should they want to find common ground with other Jews, are going to find that their followers are no longer willing to follow that direction. And we will see what we will see of what will come for our brothers and sisters in Israel, and we will see of what will come for Judaism as a whole from it. But it's coming to a head. It is getting worse, absolutely. And Israel will need our support to know the direction that we think she should go, and to know that we will be behind the land of Israel and will be behind the people of Israel come what may. But we will not support Israel becoming a fundamentalist totalitarian state. And we will not support even the smallest steps in that direction. We support and agree that everyone should have the right to live in freedom in the land of our people. And for the Haredim, they can live as they wish, but their will cannot be imposed upon the rest of the nation. They can't burn the storehouses to force compliance among the others in Israel. any more than the others of Israel can force compliance among them.
Don't you think, though, that the change of the coalition and government will affect it? Really, I think what maybe we're experiencing now is a backlash because that has happened. There's a push because the writing's on the wall, more or less, with the change of the coalition.
Well, the writing's in the memo. We haven't actually received a full Knesset vote to support the proposed legislation. And until we do, and until it's implemented, which even at best is only being called for in 4 years' time, I don't necessarily believe it until I see it. Because especially Likud, which is Netanyahu's party, has cooperated far too long with the Haredim to think that his current coalition is more permanent. And he knows that next election cycle, next coalition building cycle, he will probably need the Haredim on his side. And I'm not sure that he's willing to sign away that opportunity yet. So even if it's put into law, if it's not implemented for 4 years, that's a lot of time to revoke it. And as we just saw with the attack on the women at the Kotel this last Rosh Chodesh, they were prohibited from praying even though the Supreme Court said they had the right to by the police. When the Haredim attacked them this last Rosh Chodesh, the police went against the Supreme Court decision and removed the women rather than removing the people who were attacking them. And as long as that continues, the writing may be on the wall and there may be a backlash, but if the people are willing to give in to the backlash, then it will not change. And in my opinion, better to force the issue now than in another 20 years when it will only be worse. And I'm not sure whether or not Israel has the political courage to face this crisis today. But it has to, or else it will be devastating in even greater terms in 20 years, where it will have to be faced. So, Monday night, we will be getting together here with most of the other local synagogues for a community commemoration of Tisha B'Av, 8:30 p.m. We will be having our service and chanting from the Book of Lamentations, the Book of Eicha. Please come. If you can't come Monday night, or if you can come Monday night but also want to come on Tuesday morning, we will be at the JCC at the community minyan at 7:45 in the morning. And this is a wonderful opportunity to show your connection to the broader Orlando community, to show that you have a willingness to be with Jews that aren't from your shul, that you have an interest to reach across to other Jews and say on Tisha B'Av, in particular, we are together. And especially with the current events that are unfolding, together is where we need to be. Take care.